Hey, you're back in the garage with TheEZGZ, and we're talking about one of our favorite topics: performance engines, race engines, dual carbs. Oh. I got a new message on an old video asking me how to take their dual carbs off of their engine. And I thought, well, that's kind of a simple question. So I started typing away a reply, and it got to be longer and longer and longer. And I thought, that sounds simple, but if you bought a car and it already had dual carbs on it, it could be a mystery, and you want to do it right. You don't want to mess things up. So I thought, okay, I'll just make a video on that. It's a lot easier than trying to type it out, and it might help several people. So anyhow, I think it'd be easiest to come over here to the 2110 and just kind of look at this setup. Now, there's going to be a lot of different kinds of carburetor linkage out there. There's some popular ones. This is one style, but the same information applies. You're going to have a throttle cable coming through the shroud from your gas pedal, and it's going to connect someplace back here. You'll see the cable. So you want to loosen this up, remove the cable, get that loosened up first. Then, for example, in this case, I like to remove the top of the linkage arm where it goes onto this connecting shaft. This is real easy to do. It's got a nut right here, and I'll let the arm swing down and dangle. Next thing you might want to do is remove the spark plug wires from all four cylinders. Label them or identify them so you don't get them mixed up when you put them back on. Now you're going to have two nuts that you're going to have to loosen. There's two studs that stick out of the engine, the block, the head, and in this case it's an 8mm stud. That's probably going to be straight across the board, and in this case you want to use a 13mm wrench, or it doesn't matter what kind you got, but a good quality wrench is always nice to have so it doesn't slip. In most cases, unless somebody has modified the side of the intake manifold, you're not going to be able to get a socket on there. You're probably not going to be able to get a closed end wrench. So what you want to do is just, and it is a struggle, especially if you've never done it before. This one you can see and get to. It's closest. And you're just going to have to go a flat at a time. A flat would be, as far as you can turn it. You don't want to booger up or round it up or use vice grips and things like that. Try to use the proper tool whenever you can, and you can see it's a tight fit. These Craftsman wrenches work fine, and they're one of my favorites. If you can afford other types of wrenches that are fine, good for you. Now, the back one, there's one in the same location. You want to do the same thing. Remove your spark plug wire, and you'll have to do it on this. I recommend doing it just a little bit at a time. Do a couple flats on this side, then maybe come over here and do a couple flats on that side. Just kind of loosen up evenly, because you don't want to be putting unnecessary stress. You don't know who put this thing together. You don't want to break these flanges. It's not likely that that's going to happen. It's not that fragile, but I just want you to be aware, Murphy's Law, it'll be you or it'll be me. And just take your time and loosen it up and pull it straight up. As soon as you get that loose and those ports exposed in the head, get a clean cloth and put it in those holes so that nothing falls down in there. Then you're going to want to lift it straight up and back out of the way and work it off. You probably want to take your air cleaners off, your fuel lines off before you loosen it up from the head. Hope I'm not confusing you. Let's take a look at another setup here on a different engine. This has dual throat carbs, but if you had the single throat Cadrons, it might be, a similar setup. This is real popular. This is a CB Performance linkage setup, and it uses a ball and a stud that goes into part of the air cleaner bracket, and it goes inside this shaft. There's a spring in there. be sure that that spring doesn't fall down and into the head and cause you some grief. This one I do the same thing. I loosen this linkage arm here, let this one dangle, and when you put all this stuff back together, you're going to definitely, absolutely, positively have to resynchronize your carbs, and that's worth another video. I already have videos up on that, but if you need to, I can make another one. I usually wait to make my videos until I'm doing the type of work on my own stuff, rather than take things I have all apart just to make a video. If your stuff is running good, leave it alone. Now on this particular one, there wasn't enough room for the standard size nut. And what people will often do is use a nut that, same 8mm stud, but it's a 11mm wrench that goes on here. And it'll be smaller. These sometimes fit if you have high performance exhaust. They use the smaller nuts because they won't clear with the full size nut. Here's an example right here. This is an 1.5" header, and you just can't get the full size nut. It rubs on the welder, so they use these smaller nuts, but they also fit here on the intake manifold. It's great if you have a close connection. Watch the gasket. Make sure you have a good gasket down there. If this is an engine that's unknown to you and you purchased the car and already had this stuff, you really need to look at that stuff carefully and closely. I prefer not to use the stock metal gaskets on these type of performance intake manifolds. It's just me. Other people have done it. I'm sure there's always going to be an exception to the rule. You're going to have to make that call on yourself. I wouldn't reuse those stock metal gaskets. It's just a more potential for leaks. If you have a nice, pliable, good gasket, it won't leak, and you have good contact surface area, you're not stressing your intake manifolds. So, when you take these fuel lines off, and don't follow my lead on this, I don't think I have made a good choice. I use this fuel line to go from carburetor to carburetor. It would probably be better to use some sort of a hard tubing and then just use fuel tubing like this for your connection. But I don't like to have any more hose clamps than I need, and this kind of moved around. You can pick up heat off the engine here. That's not a good thing. There's a lot of pros and cons to doing it this way, and I don't know how your engine is set up. But if your fuel line is old and it's real hard and it doesn't want to come right off when you loosen the clamp, cut it and put new fuel line on. But take a razor blade or something sharp and cut that line to loosen it up. Don't be cutting into the aluminum, but just cut the fuel line and wiggle it and try to get it off there without putting too much stress on your fittings. Okay, let's look at one of these linkage arms here. Here's a set of carburetors. I thought it'd be easier to just show you on the engine. But here's the stud. I just happen to be carrying I have 2 studs in there because that's a good place to keep a spare with you. And if you watch my videos, I'm always doing silly things out in the middle of nowhere by myself. So I always like to have spare parts, and if I can carry them right on it, then that's what I do. So here is that arm that comes over, and it would fit onto the ball. You get the idea. And inside there's that little spring. You'd have to have that spring. Hopefully whoever's put the setup on set it up correctly. That, because your engine grows, these air-cooled engines expand as they get hot. This helps your linkage rod stay centered. Believe it or not, there's a spring on both sides. Let's not go into that. Hopefully you won't have to deal with that. You may want to get a book. You didn't say particularly why you were taking these things off, for what reason. Maybe you're just going to work on the carburetors, or you want to remove the engine from your car. Now, One of the things I like about my Baja is it doesn't have all that tin, and I can access this stuff a little bit easier, and I'm always constantly doing research and development on my own. I'm never satisfied with things. I'm always changing things around. Now here I see that I've got the stock intake manifolds, and I'm using the 11mm wrench size nut on it. They're still 8mm studs. Now these are CB Performance heads, and the studs are a little bit longer. These are the 40x35 heads. I don't want to confuse you with this stuff, but it makes a difference on accessibility. If you have a stock sedan with your dual carbs, of course you could have it in a bus or a I don't know what kind of vehicle. You didn't say what kind of vehicle you had. If you have a sedan, and it's probably just as easy to remove the hood. Just takes these two screws on the hinges on each side. Of course, if you had dual carbs, you wouldn't have an air cleaner, and there's a big spring on that. You don't have to worry about that thing flying off, but when you start raising your hood and lift it off, it's all of a sudden going to push towards you, and that spring's going to open up. So you want to be careful of that. But to reach down and get those back bolts that you need to get to the nuts, it's probably easier to take the hood off. Save you some trouble. If you're pulling the engine, you'll have to take those carbs off to drop it down and slide it out. Don't want to leave those carbs on. You'll end up at some point in the procedure having to take them off, and you'll probably have torn up air cleaners and linkage and everything else. That stuff isn't cheap, so be careful how you do that. And I really hope that that helps you out, answer your question. I first thought that was kind of a simple question. Why would anybody ask me that? But as I demonstrated and showed you, there's a lot of options, and I want you to know that I don't mind helping folks. If you've got questions, leave them in the comment section. If you've got something you're a little embarrassed to ask, you can use the personal message feature. I'll let you figure that out on your own, and I hope that helps you guys, and I'm open to questions anytime. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subbing. TheEZGZ out.